Okay, so today in our video, we're going to be talking about was the partition of the subcontinent the best solution to the Hindu-Muslim conflict? So we already talked about in class about how, and in the videos, about how India got its independence, but it wasn't just enough for India to get its independence. It had to be figured out what was going to happen to India because when the British decided to leave India, they decided that India was going to be divided up. So that takes us to the first question, which is why was India partitioned? So now, first off, Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister of Britain during the duration of the um, during the duration of World War II, was not too pleased with the idea of stopping of giving India its independence. He vowed never to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire, and he had suspended any measures that the Indians were getting towards home rule. During World War II, the Indians were ordered to aid Britain in World War II, and just like in World War I, we saw an economic devastation of India. And so India did not fare very well throughout the course of the war, and Britain itself obviously did not fare very well throughout the course of the war. And it became clear after World War II that it was impractical for Britain to have such a large empire, and that if Britain was going to be able to rebuild after the war, they were going to have to divide up. They were going to have to start giving up their lands. So the Indian National Congress, the INC, wanted Britain to quit India, just wanted Britain to leave, whereas the Muslim League wanted India to be divided and quit. So there was the issue over was it going to be one large Indian country or was it going to be divided up? So the British decided that they were going to divide India and have the Hindus and Muslims separate. There was quite a few reasons why. If we have time in class, we're going to be reading something from Jinnah that's going to kind of explain who's the first president of Pakistan and the leader of the Muslim League, and he kind of will explain his reasonings as to why he feels like a united India is not possible. One of those reasons is that Hindus and Muslims were separate, and since Muslims had been the former rulers of India under the Mughals, they were unwilling to assimilate into British ways. And Hindus, were earning higher positions in the government, and there was resentment between Hindus and Muslims. Gandhi and Nehru, though, wanted India to act as one nation, but that was not supported by the Muslims. And in August of 1946, the Muslim League called for a day of direct action, and 6,000 people were killed in what was known as the Great Calcutta Killing. And Jinnah says that he feels that the only solution to India's problem is a separate India. So on June 3rd, 1947, the Viceroy of India, which the Viceroy of India here, Louis Mountbatten, he transfers power to the two countries. So there is going to be an India and there is going to be a Pakistan. Now, the region of Bengal, if we go back up to here, if we see here on the eastern side of the Indian subcontinent, that region there, which is labeled East Pakistan, was at one point the Kingdom of Bengal. So Bengal was partitioned. Parts of Bengal stayed within India, parts of Bengal went to Pakistan, which meant that West Pakistan here, which today is just the country of Pakistan, and East Pakistan, after the partition, are actually going to be one country, which really does not, really does not make much sense. So, if we look at the map of India, we see that there are large portions of the area that are almost 100% or with a very high percentage of Hindus and very high percentages of Muslims. So if we look, everything that's in that kind of like dark greenish, brownish color, that's over 60% Muslim. And then you look to the lighter green areas, you're talking about between 0 and 20%, 20 and 40% Muslim. So on June 30th, the Bengal Boundary Commission was formed, and their job was to figure out um, the partition. Um, the goal was to ensure for some people that, well, basically, you have the two sides of the coin. You have the Bengal Partition League, sorry, going backwards a little bit. The Bengal Partition League wanted to make sure as many Hindu majority areas were a part of India. And then you had the Bengal Muslim League, and they wanted the opposite. They wanted to ensure as many Muslim areas were in Pakistan. Um, and so June 30th, like I said, the Bengal Boundary Commission was formed, and their job was to figure out the partition, decide which country would have specific neighborhoods, districts, railroads, schools, etc. This was not such an easy thing to just take an area that had been one country and had infrastructure that was connecting it as one country, and now trying to divide it into separate countries. Um, the guy who headed the commission, we can guess, his name was Cyril Radcliffe, Radcliffe. Just like with the partition of Africa, he had never actually been to India, but he was the one who was in charge of the division, which again makes no sense. And he used for his information the All India Census from 1941. So, in 1941, there was a census done. He was using that information to base the areas that were majority Hindu versus the areas that were majority Muslim to divide the two countries. However, these did not reflect the migrations that had happened in the past couple of years in kind of the wake of the growing sectarian violence between Hindus and Muslims. A lot of people had moved already in anticipation of the partition. So Muslims and Hindus had already begun leaving areas. So that census from 1941 did not reflect all of those various different migrations. Also, the public was not included in the decisions. The drafts of the various different boundaries were not released. People were sending appeals, and the Boundary Commission never read them. In addition, other resources had to be split. So 80% of movable goods were going to go to India, 20% of movable goods were going to go to Pakistan. Government employees were then given the option to work for either India or Pakistan, and they had the same choice for the military as well. But the lines were finalized on August 12, 1947, and those boundaries were kept from the public for several days, and eventually the partition was revealed on August 17th, 1947. And if we look on this map here and we see the red line here indicates the boundaries, we can see that there are some major problems with the boundaries, because you have this area up here, which today is called the region of the Kashmir. You're having over 60% Muslim, but they're going to be part of India. You have this area here around Lahore, which is between 40 and 60% Muslim, which means it's between 40 and 60% Hindu, and that's going to be part of Pakistan. If you look at this area here, which is East Pakistan, which today is the country of Bangladesh, 40 to 60% Muslim, but again, that means 60 to 40% Hindu. So these lines, like we've seen before in other circumstances, were not perfect. And this is going to create a very big problem for when these two countries are actually created. And if you can see on this map, you could see all those arrows indicate the movements of people that is going to occur after partition, because many Hindus are going to leave the areas that were given to Pakistan, and many Muslims are going to leave the areas that were given to India and move into Pakistan. Which takes us to this question. How was the subcontinent impacted by the partition? So basically, 15 million refugees fled the borders to the new countries. So there was a mass movement, which resulted in huge, massive riots. Because you see, as the people were moving, the people are not happy that they're moving. They're being forced to move because, the country has been, borders have been drawn. So as the people are moving back and forth, there's death, there's loss of property, there's rape, there's abduction. The lines around what becomes Bangladesh left 5.3 million Muslims in India. The region of what was considered West Bengal, which was 25% of the population, there was a huge amount of Muslims that were not put into Bangladesh. There was 11 million Hindus in Pakistan. That made them about 28% of the population. So the religious minorities began to cross borders, fearing for their safeties. Muslims in India crossed into Pakistan, fearing for their safety, and Hindus in Pakistan began crossing the borders into India, fearing for their safety. Um, Businesses were looted, refugee camps were formed. It was a massive mess of 15 million refugees switching back and forth. They estimate between one to a half to a million people died in the violence, that erupted as a result of this. Many people had to stay behind though because they could not afford to relocate to India. So in India, the Muslim minorities experienced a lot of violence and intimidation. Um, and in Pakistan, many middle and upper class Hindu families were treated as inferior, and some then later migrated. We also start to see basically the segregation of neighborhoods and houses kind of along religious lines. So minorities would leave multi-religious neighborhoods and they kind of like were barricading themselves in their home. The governments of both countries are not discouraging this segregation. So in India, you have kind of like zones that were created for Muslim families and homes that were marked for Hindus and Muslims, regardless of who lived there. So if in your house they decided this is going to be a Muslim neighborhood and you're Hindu, you're out of luck, and vice versa. Um, and the refugees really weren't welcomed into India or Pakistan because they were just being so overwhelmed. Because, like I said before, it was 15 million people that were moving. So they were discriminated against, and many squatter colonies developed. So, in the area of Punjab, and I'll just go back to the map of India for a second. So, it's northwestern India is the area of Punjab. The violence basically the governments agreed to a complete transfer of Hindus and Muslims because here you could see there was such large numbers up here of Muslim and Hindu minorities. Um, so basically, in 1947, when India was quote unquote granted its independence, it was given dominion status. It wasn't given full independence. Britain was still controlling some of the country. So in 1950, India got its first constitution, and in 1956, Pakistan got its first constitution. Um, Many South Asians moved to Great Britain just to escape the chaos that was being created by this partition. And basically, they took factory and other low skilled jobs in Britain, and they became about 5% of the population. Um, it's not a good relationship that develops between India and Pakistan. The boundaries were very tightly patrolled. It was difficult to get visas to cross back and forth across the borders, and relatives were separated. Um, in particular, this area up here in the north, which was 60% Muslim, that area, which was referred to as Kashmir, Kashmir, um, is going to create a massive problem where there's going to be wars fought between India and Pakistan over the areas of Kashmir. Because one of the ways that the Boundary Commission worked to divide up India was that it had originally been 500 different autonomous princely states. The prince of each area, in some instances, got to choose India or Pakistan. The Prince of Kashmir was Hindu, even though he ruled over a Muslim majority. And so the leader basically had strong ties to India and he decided to join India, which, like I said, led to 3 wars between India and Pakistan over these areas, over borders of the Kashmir, because there were a lot of people within Kashmir that would have rather been part of Pakistan. Um, so in India, though, to kind of add to the complication of this, in India in 1974, they became a nuclear country, and Pakistan in 1998 became a nuclear country. But so all said and done, the partition of India caused a great deal of violence, a great deal of bloodshed. Between about 12 million, like between 12 to 15 million people moved, about a million people died, and about 75,000 women were victims of sexual violence. Gandhi spoke out against this. He did not want to see India divided. Like I had said before, he thought it would be possible for India to be one nation. So he had gone on hunger fasts to try to stop the violence between the two sides. And in the end, he was able to get the violence to kind of calm down. And at one of his first prayer meetings, prayer appearances after breaking his fast, he is assassinated by a Hindu fundamentalist who felt that Gandhi was too sympathetic to the Muslim cause. So Gandhi was assassinated as a result of kind of what to do with this issue of these two countries. So the question then becomes, was this dream of one united India possible? Like, could the two sides have worked together? Could there have been one big India instead of a divided India?